The chandelier light fractured across her skin like 1,000 tiny stars. Dr. Amara Bennett stood at the center of the ballroom, her sapphire gown cascading in ripples of silk, every inch of her radiating calm perfection. The cameras loved her. The flashbulbs caught the gleam in her eyes, the effortless grace of a woman who seemed to have it all: beauty, brilliance, and a husband who adored her. Or so everyone believed. Beside her, Ethan Caldwell, the golden man of New York's biotech world, was telling a story that made the investors roar with laughter. His hand rested casually on Amara's back, fingers barely touching, a gesture rehearsed 1,000 times for public display. To the crowd, they were the definition of success. To Amara, it was just choreography. And yet, at that very moment, while applause echoed and champagne sparkled, Amara felt something inside her crack, soft and invisible, like a hairline fracture in glass before it shatters. She didn't know why. She only knew that Ethan's laughter no longer sounded like home. Before we go further, take a deep breath and remember this moment. Because what happens next isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about awakening, about fire, and about the night a woman turned her heartbreak into legend. If you've ever been lied to and refused to break, stay until the end. And if you believe truth should always find its way to the light, share this story, leave your thoughts below, and follow for the next chapter. You'll want to see how far this woman rises. The night was a masterpiece of illusion. The Metropolis Biomedical Gala, an event where power wore diamonds and ambition tasted like vintage champagne. The city's elite filled the glass atrium overlooking the Hudson, murmuring about mergers, patents, and charity, while the orchestra played a waltz no one was really listening to. Amara smiled for the cameras because that's what was expected. She had mastered the art of controlled grace, the kind that women in her position learn out of survival. Neurosurgeon, scholar, the first Black woman to lead her department at Mount Sinai. Every achievement carved out of late nights and double standards. She'd built a life of precision, of control. But tonight, something felt off, a dissonant note under the music. When Ethan excused himself to take a quick investor call, Amara's smile didn't falter. It couldn't. She lifted her champagne flute and turned toward the massive window, watching the city shimmer below. Her reflection looked flawless. High cheekbones, perfect hair, the very image of composure. But her gut twisted. There had been too many of these calls lately. Too many quiet exits followed by too bright returns. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Dr. Bennett, you must be proud," said a woman from the hospital board. "Your husband's company is changing lives. The two of you, truly inspiring." Amara laughed politely. "He's extraordinary," she said, the words smooth but hollow. The woman moved on, leaving Amara alone again with the music, the glitter, the gnawing silence. Across the room, she saw Ethan reappear near the balcony, his phone still in hand. His smile looked different. Not the charming grin he wore for investors, but softer, private, intimate. He was texting someone, and the faint smirk that touched his lips made her heart falter. She took a slow sip of champagne to steady herself. "Don't be ridiculous," she thought. "You're just tired. He loves you. You're imagining things." But the voice in her head, the one that had learned to listen to the smallest inconsistencies in human behavior, whispered otherwise. The same instincts that saved lives in the operating room were now dissecting her own reality. A moment later, Ethan returned, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Everything okay, love?" he asked, his tone perfectly light. "Of course," she said, and smiled for the next photographer. The flash went off. Her smile stayed. Inside, something shifted irrevocably. Later, as the orchestra swelled and couples danced beneath the chandelier, Amara stepped out onto the terrace for air. The wind off the Hudson was sharp, carrying the scent of rain. Behind her, the laughter continued, the music of Manhattan's perfect people. Ahead of her stretched a skyline that had once represented ambition and hope. Now, it looked like a battlefield waiting to happen. She closed her eyes and let the chill cut through her calm. Her hands trembled just slightly, hidden in the folds of her gown. The human brain, she knew, could sense danger before the conscious mind understood it. Instinct, pre-diagnosis. and every instinct in her body was screaming that something in her world had just begun to die. When she turned back toward the ballroom, she saw Ethan again, smiling, charming, unbothered. He raised a glass toward her across the room, his gesture elegant, theatrical, and utterly hollow. She raised hers, too, her lips forming the kind of smile that women wear when they know they're about to bleed, but refuse to let anyone see it. And that was the moment, though she didn't yet realize it, that Dr. Amara Bennett began her transformation. From wife to warrior, from silence to storm, the perfect life was cracking, and every fracture was letting the truth pour through. Morning unspooled itself with the calm choreography Amara had perfected. Coffee warming her hands, the city's sirens thinning into background strings, a quick scan of patient charts before rounds. She pressed her thumb to the glass of her apartment window and traced a tiny breath cloud, as if she could draw a circle around the part of her life that still felt solid. Behind her, Ethan hummed as he buttoned his shirt, off-key, a childhood habit she used to find endearing. Today, it set her nerves on edge. "Back late," he said without looking up. "Investor dinner in Tribeca, the kind where everyone speaks in numbers." He kissed the top of her head. The gesture landed like a signature at the bottom of a contract she hadn't read. Amara slipped into the hospital's clean brightness and let it bless her. The operating room was a truth teller. Blood that should flow, tissue that should not, an outcome that depended on steadiness rather than charm. Her hands were rock steady. Her mind was not. She caught herself listening for a vibration that wasn't there, a phantom buzz of Ethan's phone. The human brain, she knew, is a pattern machine. Today it was assembling shapes out of nothing, or maybe out of everything. At noon she stepped into the staff elevator and caught her reflection. Immaculate bun, crisp white coat, a woman who could wake a child's body from darkness and bring him back whole. She watched herself breathe. Somewhere between inhale and exhale, a thought slipped through. You have been performing life with him. You set the stage, he hits his marks, the audience applauds. But when the curtain falls, who are you speaking to in the dark? She dismissed it and made her rounds. That evening, rain stitched the streets together as she slid into Ethan's Tesla to move it before the street sweeper came. She adjusted the seat and felt something click against her ring finger. A small metallic sound. She reached under the leather and drew out a single stud earring, delicate and unmistakably unfamiliar. A teardrop of pale mother of pearl, luminous even in the dull cabin light. Not hers. Not ever hers. The air sharpened. She sat very still, the way she did before the first incision, when the whole room holds its breath and the body is honest. She turned the earring in her palm. A single hair was looped through the back, fine and light, a color that did not belong to her. She set it on the console as though placing evidence on sterile drape, then wiped a foggy streak from the windshield with the back of her wrist, leaving a clear, brutal smear. By the time Ethan came home, late, effusive, rain on his collar, she had returned the Tesla keys to their place and slid the earring into the pocket of her coat. He was luminous with stories. The dinner had been productive. The numbers, insane. The future, a machine you just need to feed. He tasted like bourbon and something floral that wasn't her perfume. "How was your day?" he asked, hand at her waist. "There was a child," she said simply. "We kept his language." He smiled, not understanding that in neurosurgery, that sentence is a hymn. In the quiet after his shower, she stood at the dresser and watched him in the mirror. He reached for a cologne she hadn't seen before, glass thick as a skyscraper. He misted his neck. The scent was green and expensive, almost Roman in its confidence. The old bottle, her anniversary gift, sat full and neglected. He saw her looking. "Sample from a client," he said, too quickly, as if he'd been rehearsing casual. 3 days later, she lifted a jacket from the dry cleaning plastic and caught the whiff of a perfume she couldn't name. It was intimate and high-end, the kind of fragrance with a French name that sounds like a confession. She brought the fabric closer, then held it away, as if the smell itself might leave fingerprints on her face. She folded the jacket carefully and placed it back where he'd find it, immaculate and damning. Small things mutated into symptoms. Calendar blocks labeled bored, suddenly recurring on Tuesdays. A laptop that used to live open on the counter now closing when she entered. A passcode changed without mention. A laugh in the next room, soft and private, followed by the clean snip of a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. She told herself she was being dramatic. Then she remembered who she was. Drama had never saved a life. Data had. She began keeping a surgeon's log, the ritual she trusted most. Not a journal, not a diary, just a ledger. Date, time, anomaly. Tuesday, 6:40 p.m., says, Uptown board dinner, tie with silver clip, new cologne, mood elevated. Tuesday, 11:55 p.m., returns without hunger, shower before speaking. Saturday, 2:15 p.m., meets Mark at the Bowery, arrives home sun-tired as if from outside. Entry after entry, the shapeless unease began to form a spine. At the hospital gala the following week, another chandelier, another curated orchestra, Amara found herself surrounded by compliments that registered like static. "You two are a dream," someone sighed. "I could watch you walk into a room all night." Amara smiled, her mouth remembering what her heart did not. Across the room, Ethan angled his body toward a shadow she couldn't see. His eyes warmed in a way that had nothing to do with the person on his arm. In the bathroom, under unforgiving light, Amara pressed cold water to the inside of her wrists. She tilted her head and watched the woman in the mirror. Surgeon, daughter, friend, wife. How many versions of herself had she carved to fit this marriage? How many quiet cuts had she tolerated? She thought of the children she had promised to protect with her hands. She thought of the vow she had made to herself long before she met Ethan, to honor what was true. When she returned to the table, Ethan rose to pull out her chair. The small gentlemanliness made her throat tighten. He could be so careful with appearance. She wondered who taught him that tenderness could be performance. She wondered when she had agreed to be the stage. The next morning, a sun too bright for the season poured over their kitchen island. Ethan left early for a site visit, and the apartment hummed with the purified silence of good design. Amara sat with her coffee and placed the earring on the marble. The stone caught the light and returned it, small and immodest. She imagined the lobe it had left, the smile, the moment it fell. She imagined Ethan's hand, reaching, failing. In her chest, something closed, softly, decisively, as if a door had found its frame. She picked up her phone, opened his shared calendar, and looked at Tuesday. Board dinner, 7 p.m., Soho House. Again. Amara's thumb hovered. She did not open his messages. She would not turn herself into a detective in her own home. That, she decided, would be insult added to injury. She would not spy. She would observe. She would know. In the afternoon, she walked the city, the winter light like thin gold on steel. Everything was honest out here. People hurried, argued, laughed. No one pretended not to want what they wanted. She stopped at a cafe and, for the first time in weeks, tasted her coffee. The bitterness was clean, clarifying. She took out her ledger and wrote, "You are not crazy. You are collecting facts. Do not anesthetize your instincts to protect his image." A woman can keep her grace and still demand the truth. When evening stretched its long violet across the glass of their apartment, Ethan texted, "Running late, don't wait up." The words were efficient, well-bred. She placed her phone face down and turned off every light but one. She stood in the quiet and listened to the city breathe around her, a pulse she knew by heart. Somewhere below, sirens braided with laughter. Somewhere above, a plane stitched another life across the sky. The first crack had sounded like nothing at all. Now she could hear the glass singing. Not yet shattering, no, not yet, but soon. Soon the lie would not hold, and when it broke, it would cut. She would decide where the blade landed. The snow that morning fell with the quiet precision of a secret. Amara walked through it on her way to work, the city wrapped in white silence, as if the world itself were trying to keep her from hearing what she was about to discover. She moved through the familiar rhythm, rounds, surgeries, consultations. But her body felt borrowed, her smile rehearsed. Beneath the surface calm, the mind of a scientist was taking notes, assembling data, searching for proof. That evening, when she returned home, Ethan was gone again. Investor dinner, he'd said, with that smooth, honeyed tone that sounded less like conversation and more like a sales pitch. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen island, the marble cool beneath her fingers. She tried to read, tried to eat, but the silence around her was a kind of scream. She stood, restless, and walked toward Ethan's office, a place she rarely entered. It smelled faintly of cedar and ambition. The walls were lined with framed awards, architectural sketches, and certificates signed in looping, powerful handwriting. Everything about the room was curated to project success. On the desk, a stack of papers leaned precariously near his laptop. Amara's eyes didn't seek trouble, but truth has a way of shimmering when it wants to be seen. A folded receipt peeked out from between two documents, half hidden, but too deliberate to ignore. She hesitated, fingers trembling slightly, then pulled it free. It was from Le Jardin Bleu, a French restaurant tucked away in the heart of Soho, one she knew well. It was the same place Ethan had taken her on their anniversary 3 years ago, where he'd promised, "No matter how high we climb, I'll never let distance come between us." The date on the receipt was last Tuesday. Dinner for two, a bottle of Chateau Margaux. Dessert, 2 chocolate soufflés. Her heart stuttered. Last Tuesday, he had told her he was in Boston for a corporate panel on ethics in biotech. She remembered his voice on the phone, warm and tired. "It's boring, baby. Can't wait to get home to you." Now the proof lay in her hand, light as paper and heavy as a stone. Amara sank into the leather chair behind the desk. For a long moment, she simply stared at the receipt, her pulse steadying into something cold and deliberate. Grief didn't come first. Analysis did. Her surgeon's brain dissected the evidence. Date, time, location, transaction. No plausible deniability, no miscommunication. A man who could fabricate entire schedules had fabricated his fidelity too. Outside, the snow thickened. The city blurred into watercolor. She pressed her thumb over the ink, as if she could smudge it back into uncertainty, but it refused to fade. The truth never does. A sound behind her. A click. The door. Ethan's voice. "Hey, you're still up?" Amara turned slowly. He was shaking snow from his coat, cheeks flushed from the cold. His eyes flickered toward the desk, then to her hands. For one infinitesimal second, his gaze froze, just long enough for her to see the flicker of fear before the smile snapped back into place. "Long day?" he asked lightly. She placed the receipt back on the desk, perfectly aligned with the edge. "You could say that." Ethan's eyes followed her movements. "Everything okay?" "Of course," she said, her tone smooth as glass. "How was dinner?" He blinked. "Dinner? With the investors," she said, her lips curving into something that could almost be mistaken for affection. "In Tribeca." He nodded too quickly. "Productive, exhausting. You know how these things are." "Of course." Her voice was soft, but her mind was sharp as a scalpel. He kissed her forehead, murmured goodnight, and disappeared down the hall. The bedroom door closed with the sound of finality. Amara sat alone again, the receipt gleaming faintly under the desk lamp. She wanted to cry, but the tears refused her. Instead, she felt a new, unfamiliar composure, the kind that visits a person right before transformation. The next morning, she drove to the hospital early. The city was still half asleep, the streets washed pale by dawn. She parked and sat for a moment, watching her breath fog the windshield. Then she opened her phone and typed Le Jardin Bleu into Maps. She zoomed in on the pin, the memory of candlelight and promises flooding back. She could almost hear Ethan's voice from that night. "You and me, Amara. Always truth, never secrets." The irony twisted inside her. But beneath the ache, a strange sense of resolve began to take shape. If he could lie so effortlessly, she would learn to listen differently. If he could build illusions, she would build clarity. Later that day, she stopped at the dry cleaners to pick up Ethan's suits. The owner handed her the garments with a polite smile, and as she turned to leave, something slipped from the pocket of one jacket and landed softly at her feet. A folded event program embossed in gold. The Midnight Gallery, exclusive art preview. Bodies in Motion. Date, the same Tuesday. Guest list, By private invitation only. She unfolded it slowly, and there, near the bottom, was a printed note. Special thanks to curator Lena Moreau for her partnership and vision. The name hit her like a whisper through glass. She didn't know who Lena Moreau was. Not yet, but she would. When she returned home that evening, Ethan was charming again, full of stories, gestures, laughter that skimmed the surface of sincerity. She smiled, played her part, listened carefully. Every word he spoke became data. Every pause, every breath, a clue. That night, after he fell asleep, she retrieved the receipt and the art program from the drawer and placed them side by side. Two pieces of a puzzle she hadn't chosen, but was now determined to solve. She studied the handwriting on the receipt, the elegant curl of the server's pen, the faint smudge where someone had set down a glass. Her reflection glimmered in the window above the desk, and for the first time, she didn't look like a woman doubting her husband. She looked like a woman preparing for war. Somewhere in the distance, a snowplow scraped against the street, a harsh metallic sound breaking through the hush. Amara didn't flinch. The world outside was cold, yes, but the world inside her was beginning to burn. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would start keeping records. Tomorrow, she would stop loving him blindly and start seeing him completely. The glass had cracked, and through that fracture, light was finally getting in. The following Tuesday arrived with the sterile chill of early February, a sky the color of unpolished steel. By then, Amara had memorized the patterns of Ethan's deceit. Tuesdays always began with the same performance. The silk tie, the crisp suit, the text that read, "Board dinner tonight, love. Don't wait up." She didn't confront him, not yet. She had learned that silence could be sharper than any accusation. When the elevator doors closed behind him that morning, Amara exhaled, not in sadness but in clarity. The evidence she'd gathered, the receipt, the event brochure, the changed passwords, was no longer a cluster of coincidences. It was a case file, and she knew exactly what to do with it. She found Raul Mendoza's name the way most desperate people find salvation, by accident and instinct. His website was plain, unadorned, but his testimonials spoke in reverent tones. He finds the truth no one else dares to look for. His office sat above an old bookstore on the Lower East Side, a place where the city's noise softened into anonymity. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and paper. When Amara entered, Raul was pouring black coffee into two chipped mugs. He looked nothing like the detectives from television. No trench coat, no theatrics. Just a man in his 50s with silver-threaded hair, a weathered face, and eyes that looked as if they'd spent a lifetime decoding the spaces between words. "Dr. Bennett," he greeted, extending a hand that felt both steady and heavy with experience. "I read your message. You think your husband is lying to you." Amara hesitated before sitting. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than she expected. "I don't think. I know something's wrong. I just don't know how deep it goes." Raul listened without interruption as she recounted the timeline. The dinners, the receipts, the perfume, the altered calendar entries. He took notes in a small leather journal, his pen scratching with deliberate precision. When she finished, he said simply, "I'll find out who she is." The words hit like a diagnosis. Terrible, necessary, inevitable. He asked for Ethan's schedule, car model, and the restaurants he frequented. "He sounds predictable," Raul said. "Men who build empires often are. They think consistency is virtue. It's really camouflage." Amara nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "What happens now?" "I start watching," he said, discreetly. "I'll have a report within 3 weeks." She stood to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Doctor," he said gently, "truth is a blade. Be sure you want to hold it before I hand it to you." She met his eyes, unflinching. "I'm a surgeon, Mr. Mendoza. I know how to hold sharp things." That night, the penthouse felt foreign, too clean, too designed. Ethan was charming again, spinning stories about potential mergers, his laughter spilling easily across the marble countertops. Amara responded in kind, her tone practiced, her mind elsewhere. She watched his reflection in the wineglass between them and wondered if he'd ever noticed how transparent glass really was. As days passed, Amara learned to perform normalcy with surgical precision. She laughed at his jokes, cooked his favorite meals, even ironed his shirts. But beneath that calm exterior, her mind was cataloging everything. His patterns, his excuses, the subtle energy of guilt disguised as confidence. Every Tuesday, she knew Raoul was somewhere nearby, shadowing Ethan's every movement. The thought gave her a strange kind of comfort, like a heartbeat she couldn't hear but trusted was still there. Week 1 passed with no update. Week 2 came with a single text: "We're close." By week 3, Amara could barely sleep. Her body lived in two worlds, one built on memory, one bracing for revelation. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as dusk sank over Manhattan. "Dr. Bennett," Raoul's voice said through the line, calm but weighted. "We need to meet." When she arrived at his office, the blinds were drawn. On the desk lay a thick manila folder. Raoul didn't speak at first. He just slid it toward her. Inside were photographs, grainy, undeniable. Ethan walking hand in hand with a woman through the entrance of an art gallery. Ethan leaning close at a cafe, his expression tender. Ethan pressing a kiss to the woman's forehead outside a boutique hotel. Her name was Lena Moreau. Raoul had traced her through event lists, social media, and whispers in art circles. "She's an independent curator," he explained. 30 years old, works with private collectors, mostly in Soho and Paris. They've been seen together every Tuesday for over a year. Amara's hands shook as she turned the pages. There was no blood, no violence, yet the images felt surgical. Clean incisions through the heart of her life. Raoul continued, his tone clinical but not unkind. They attend gallery openings. Private dinners. He introduces her as his partner. Some people in that circle believe he's divorced. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The air itself felt too heavy, the silence too absolute. Her voice, when it came, sounded distant. "He told them he's divorced." "Yes," Raoul said softly. "He's living two lives." Amara closed the folder, her pulse steadying into something cold and precise. "How long?" 18 months, he said. "Consistent pattern." She nodded once. The clarity was almost merciful. The uncertainty had been the real cruelty. The truth was simply a wound that could now be treated. Raoul hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing. Next week there's a private gala at the Vallon Art House. My sources say he plans to attend, with her. Possibly to make the relationship public." Amara's eyes lifted from the folder. Her gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. "Public?" "He bought jewelry yesterday. A diamond necklace from Cartier. $20,000. Amara inhaled slowly. The air burned her lungs. When she finally spoke, her tone carried no tremor. "Keep watching him," she said. "I want everything. Every transfer, every gift, every lie." Raoul nodded, quietly impressed. "Most people break when they see evidence like that." She rose, smoothing her coat. "I'm not most people." That night, as snow began to fall again over the city, Amara stood by her window and watched the streetlights blur into gold. Ethan's car pulled up below, headlights sweeping across the glass. She didn't move. She just watched him step out, straighten his tie, and enter the building with the casual arrogance of a man who believed his secrets were safe. Amara's reflection met his silhouette in the glass. Two figures separated by a pane of transparency, one blind, one awake. In the quiet, she whispered to her own reflection, "The surgery has begun." And somewhere in a dark office downtown, Raul Mendoza opened a fresh page in his notebook and began writing the story of a man about to be exposed by the woman he never truly saw. The operation for truth was now fully underway. The photographs lived inside her now. They waited behind her eyelids, flickering like film reels each time she blinked. Ethan's hand at the small of Lena Moreau's back. The curve of his smile when he thought no one was watching. The unmistakable tenderness of a man unburdened by guilt. Every image was a needle, and Amara carried them quietly, without flinching. 3 nights had passed since she'd met Raul Mendoza. She hadn't confronted Ethan, hadn't mentioned the evidence. Silence, she had decided, was her most powerful weapon. You can't fight what you don't understand, and she intended to understand everything. But silence has weight. It bends the air, thickens time. Ethan noticed it first over breakfast. "You're quiet lately," he said, reaching for his coffee. "Long week?" Amara smiled faintly. "Something like that." He reached across the table, his fingers grazing hers in a gesture that once would have comforted her. Now, it felt foreign, like a stranger rehearsing affection. He began talking about a new investment round, about upcoming travel, about a gala for partners and investors, next week in the art district. His voice moved easily through the lie, each syllable polished by practice. Amara nodded, the image of Raoul's report echoing in her head. Vallon Art House, next Thursday. Attending with Lena Moreau. She wondered if he rehearsed these speeches in the mirror, the way she practiced composure before stepping into an operating theater. That evening, after he left for a meeting, Amara sat on the edge of their bed and opened her laptop. The blue light painted her skin in the same hue as the sapphires he'd once said matched her eyes. She opened the folder of photographs Raoul had sent. Each one felt like a cut. Yet the pain wasn't chaos, it was clarity. Betrayal, she realized, was not an explosion. It was erosion. You don't notice until one day the ground beneath you is gone. She clicked through the images again, but this time she didn't cry. Instead, she studied them the way she studied MRI scans, methodically, clinically. The pattern was consistent. Tuesdays, always the same places. Her mind began assembling a timeline, a map of deceit. When Ethan returned home hours later, humming, she greeted him with warmth so perfect it startled even her. "You're up late," he said, loosening his tie. "I was just reading," she replied. "How was the meeting?" He smiled, easy, unbothered, long, productive. "Did you close the deal?" He hesitated, just a flicker, but she caught it. Almost. She leaned up and kissed him on the cheek. "You'll get it next time." Her voice was soft. Her mind was steel. Days bled into one another, each one a study in performance. She watched him through the veil of her new awareness. Every word, every glance, every pause became data. He looked at her the way a magician looks at an audience, believing the illusion still held. By Wednesday night, Raoul sent another update. Confirmed, he purchased the necklace from Cartier. Attending event tomorrow, 8 p.m., with guest. I'll be on site. Amara read the message 3 times. Then she walked to her closet. The faint scent of lavender clung to her gowns. She ran her hand across the midnight blue dress she hadn't worn in years. The one Ethan once called the color of power. The irony made her smile. She would need that dress soon enough. But for now she waited. On Thursday morning, Ethan was radiant. The kind of energy that only comes from secrets well kept. He kissed her before leaving, his cologne sharp, foreign, intoxicating. "Don't stay up," he murmured. "I won't," she promised, and for once she meant it. When the door closed, the apartment seemed to exhale. Amara moved like a woman under anesthesia, calm, deliberate, detached. She made tea she didn't drink, opened medical journals she didn't read. She kept glancing at the clock, each hour carving itself into her skin. At 8:15 p.m., she called Raoul. "It started," he said quietly. They arrived together. She's wearing the necklace. Amara closed her eyes. She could almost see it. The soft lights, the clinking of glasses. Ethan's hand at the small of Lena's back. He'd probably called her Love, in the same voice he used to whisper Amara's name. For a moment, her chest tightened. The first real ache in days. But it wasn't weakness. It was a recalibration. Grief was no longer the weight that kept her down. It was the fire pushing her upward. When Ethan came home past midnight, he smelled faintly of champagne and victory. He dropped his keys on the counter and stretched, feigning exhaustion. "Big night?" she asked softly. He grinned, oblivious to the blade hidden in her tone. "Huge. We secured a new investor." She nodded, studying him the way a scientist studies a specimen. "I'm proud of you." He reached for her hand. "You're my good luck charm. You know that?" Her smile didn't waver. "I think your luck might be changing, Ethan." He laughed, misreading the words entirely. "Let's hope it keeps changing for the better." "Oh," she said, her voice a whisper edged with promise. "It will." That night, after he fell asleep beside her, Amara sat in the glow of the city and let the quiet stretch. She looked down at the man who had shared her bed, her home, her name. His face was peaceful in sleep, disarmed by ignorance. She wondered if he dreamed of her, or of the other woman, wearing her husband's lies like jewelry. The urge to wake him, to confront him, surged for a moment. But then she imagined his denial, his practiced charm, the inevitable gaslighting that would twist her pain into paranoia. She wouldn't give him that script. Not yet. Instead, she opened Raoul's report once more, scanning the final line. He plans to attend another event next week with the same companion. Children's Health Gala, St. Regis Hotel. The irony hit like thunder. The same charity event that had once celebrated her medical research now turned into a stage for her husband's betrayal. Her pulse slowed, not from sadness but from certainty. In that moment, Amara Bennett stopped being the betrayed woman. She became something else, something forged. The collapse had already begun, but not hers. It was his, and he didn't even know it yet. The morning after the gala, sunlight spilled across the penthouse in muted gold, brushing over surfaces too polished to feel like home. Ethan was already gone, his usual note left on the counter, a perfect imitation of thoughtfulness. Board breakfast, back late, love you. The handwriting was steady, confident, rehearsed, the kind of handwriting you could build an empire on. Amara stared at it for a long moment before folding it carefully and placing it in the drawer with the others. Every one of his notes was a relic now, artifacts of a fiction she had once called marriage. The lies were so neat, so symmetrical they were almost beautiful. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching divorce attorneys. If he built their life on illusion, she would dismantle it with precision. Claire Whitmore's office occupied the top floor of a midtown skyscraper. Glass, steel, and quiet power. The kind of place where reputations went to die or be reborn, depending on who you were paying. Claire herself was a legend. 60, silver-haired, voice like velvet over stone. She had once told a senator's wife to hold her applause until the verdict. That same wife left with 80% of his assets. When Amara entered, Claire looked up from a case file and smiled faintly. "Dr. Bennett," she said, gesturing toward the chair opposite her. "I've read the summary Mr. Mendoza sent me. I must say, I admire your restraint. Most people burst through my door halfway through their meltdown. You walked in like you're about to negotiate a merger." Amara took her seat, spine straight, tone even. "Because that's exactly what this is. Except the company is my life." Claire studied her for a moment, intrigued. "Tell me what you want, Amara. Be specific." Amara's eyes met hers. "I want everything he tried to build without me." The lawyer smiled. "Good. Let's make sure you get it." Over the next week, Amara learned to weaponize truth. Claire's team collected documents, traced financial transfers, and subpoenaed accounts Ethan thought were untouchable. Offshore investments, luxury gifts, a downtown apartment, every secret began surfacing like corpses from deep water. Ethan had built his empire on charm and risk. Amara would dismantle it with evidence and law. Still, she wanted more than money. She wanted the world to see him, to truly see him, the man who lectured on ethics while eroding them in private. When Claire suggested a quiet, negotiated settlement, Amara shook her head. "No, he turned my life into a performance. I'll choose the stage for his ending." Claire leaned back, appraising her client with something close to admiration. "You're dangerous when you're calm, doctor." Amara's lips curved faintly. "I'm a surgeon. I've always been calm during incisions." Her plan began to take shape one sleepless night as the city breathed beneath her window. The Children's Health Gala, the annual fundraiser for the hospital she served, was only 2 weeks away. Ethan was on the board. He would attend. So would every investor, philanthropist, and journalist in New York. It was the perfect stage. The event had always been hers once. The year before, she'd been honored for pioneering a new pediatric neurosurgical technique. Ethan had stood at her side then, hand on her back, whispering, "You're my greatest creation." Now, he'd return with another woman draped in jewels, bought with Amara's own patience and devotion. That thought no longer hurt. It ignited. She opened her calendar and began mapping every detail. Guest lists, seating charts, photographers' angles, even the timing of the champagne service. If Ethan's downfall was to happen, it would happen beautifully, elegantly, with precision. Amara began making calls. A designer, a stylist, a publicist. She didn't tell anyone what she was planning, only that she needed to look unforgettable. By the following week, the transformation had begun. The same woman who had once measured her worth in surgical outcomes and quiet loyalty was now orchestrating her own act of revelation. At the fitting, the designer draped a gown of crimson silk over her shoulders. It shimmered like heat. "This," he said, stepping back, "isn't just a dress. It's a declaration." Amara looked at her reflection, her posture, her poise, her unflinching eyes, and smiled. "Then it's perfect." Meanwhile, Raoul continued feeding her information. "They're still meeting," he reported one evening over the phone. He took her to the Cartier store again. Looked like he was finalizing something. "Let him," Amara said simply. "He's preparing the props for his own downfall." The next night, she visited Claire's office again. The attorney raised an eyebrow as Amara entered, dressed in sleek black and certainty. "I've arranged for the divorce papers," Claire said, tapping a folder. "We'll serve him next week." "No," Amara replied, her voice smooth but firm. "We'll serve him at the gala." Just Claire blinked. "You can't be serious." "That's public?" Amara interrupted. "Yes, he built his power on appearances, so I'll take it from him the same way." Claire hesitated, then laughed softly. "You're playing chess while he's still busy dealing cards." "Fine, I'll be there personally. But understand this, doctor. Once that night begins, there's no undoing it." Amara met her gaze. "I'm not interested in undoing. I'm interested in rewriting." As the gala approached, her home became an operating room of strategy, precise, sterile, deliberate. She rehearsed her entrance, her lines, her timing. The moment Ethan's reputation would fracture would not be an accident. It would be surgery. She imagined it often. The chandeliers, the polished smiles, the orchestra's soft crescendo. Ethan's laughter echoing across the ballroom, until it stopped, until her shadow fell across him, until the truth bloomed in front of hundreds of witnesses. But there was more at stake than revenge. Beneath the precision of her plan pulsed something deeper, a reclamation. For years she had been the woman who made him look whole, who softened his arrogance with grace. Now she would remind him, and the world, that she was never the accessory. She was the architect. The final night before the gala, she stood before her mirror, the red gown waiting like a flame behind her. Her reflection met her gaze, unblinking. "You were never his creation," she whispered to herself. "He was yours." The city outside glittered with 1,000 lights, each one trembling with anticipation. Somewhere across town, Ethan Caldwell was likely laughing, drinking, believing himself untouchable. Amara smiled. The strategy was complete. Tomorrow she would light the match. The city glittered like it was holding its breath. From her penthouse window, Amara watched Manhattan pulse, neon veins under a dark sky. The world below her still believed in the illusion of calm, but she was already building the storm that would strip every layer of Ethan Caldwell's carefully crafted facade. The days leading up to the gala became a study in control. Every morning she moved through her routines, surgery, meetings, hospital rounds, with surgical precision, as though nothing beneath the surface had changed. But behind every steady motion was calculation. The strategy had evolved from an impulse for vengeance into an architecture of reckoning. She called it the game plan, not out of vanity, but necessity. Revenge, she had decided, was for amateurs. This would be correction. In her office one evening, the only light came from her computer screen. Rows of information filled the display. Financial statements, company records, photographs, text logs, all collected by Raul Mendoza. She scrolled through them with the same focus she used when dissecting a brain scan. Ethan's entire empire was there, mapped and categorized. Every account, every transfer, every fraudulent deduction disguised as a business expense. And interlaced between the numbers were traces of Lena Moreau, the dinners, the jewelry, the hotel reservations charged to company funds. The evidence was irrefutable. Claire would handle the legal strike, but Amara wanted the emotional one, the collapse that comes when truth meets the arrogance of power. She picked up her phone and called Claire. How long would it take to finalize the paperwork? 2 days, the lawyer said. But if you're thinking of what I think you are, public confrontation isn't advisable. I'm not asking for advice, Claire, Amara replied. I'm asking for logistics. A pause. Then Claire's voice softened, a hint of reluctant admiration threading through it. I'll have the documents ready by Thursday. If you do this, make sure you walk away the moment it's done. I will, Amara said, knowing she wouldn't. The next day, she met Raoul at a quiet coffee shop near Gramercy Park. The detective slid a small envelope across the table. Final report, he said. Everything you need. Bank records, photos, timestamps. He's still meeting her every Tuesday. Same pattern. Amara nodded. He'll bring her to the gala. Raoul hesitated. And you'll be there too? Yes. He studied her for a moment. Most people want to run from the wreckage. You're walking straight into it. Her eyes met his, calm and clear. That's because I'm the one lighting the fuse. Raoul leaned back, exhaling. Then I'd say you're ready for detonation. That night, she began to choreograph every detail. She studied the ballroom layout, the chandeliers, the entry path, the reporter's pit. She memorized the timing of speeches, the flow of champagne service, even the moment the orchestra would swell into its first crescendo. The image played in her mind like a film. Ethan and Lena arriving together, basking in borrowed applause. Amara's entrance timed to perfection, silence rippling through the crowd. The weight of 100 eyes turning toward truth. She didn't need to shout. She would let the evidence speak. She would let him implode. 3 nights before the gala, Amara visited Claire's office for the final briefing. The attorney laid the folder on the table, thick, bound, and devastating. Once he signs, Claire said, he forfeits the downtown apartment, half his company shares, and 70% of liquid assets. You'll retain ownership of the foundation and the research patents. Good, Amara replied, her tone even. There's more, Claire added. His reputation will take a hit, of course. Public exposure could trigger an SEC investigation. Amara looked up, eyes gleaming with quiet precision. I'm counting on it. Claire sat back, studying her client. Do you ever get scared? Amara smiled faintly. Only when I'm the one under anesthesia. In the days that followed, her home became the headquarters of an invisible war. On her desk lay 3 open folders, legal, public, and personal. Under legal, the documents Claire had prepared, color-coded and marked for signature. Under public, the names of journalists and photographers confirmed to attend the gala. Under personal, a single photo of Ethan and her from their wedding day, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder of the illusion she was about to end. She rehearsed her entrance again and again, imagining every reaction. Shock, whisper, awe, pity. She didn't crave any of it. What she wanted was silence, the kind that falls when truth becomes undeniable. 2 nights before the gala, she visited the tailor's studio for the final fitting. The crimson gown fit her like a heartbeat. When she turned toward the mirror, she didn't see a woman betrayed. She saw a force of nature contained in silk and bone. You look like someone preparing for war, the tailor murmured. Amara smiled at her reflection. I am, but the battle's already over. He just doesn't know he's lost. On the eve of the event, the city hummed with electricity. From her window, Amara could see the faint glow of the St. Regis Hotel, where the gala would unfold. The same hotel where she and Ethan had once danced beneath chandeliers, pretending forever was a promise they could afford. Now it would become his reckoning. She sat at her vanity, opened a drawer, and took out the earrings she'd found in his car months ago. The mother of pearl shimmered softly under the lamplight. She placed it beside her reflection, like an offering to the woman she used to be. You were too kind, she whispered, but kindness doesn't rebuild what deceit destroys. Then she closed the drawer, rose, and walked to the window one last time. Below her, the city pulsed with light and life, billboards flashing, taxis slicing through wet streets, dreams colliding and dissolving in the night. Tomorrow, her world would burn, and from its ashes, something entirely new would rise, refined, untouchable, and wholly her own. The plan was complete. The lines were drawn. The fire was set. Now she only needed to strike the match. The morning before the gala began like any other, but the air inside Amara Bennett's penthouse carried a strange stillness, as though the city itself was waiting to see what she would do. The sky over Manhattan was a bruised gray, restless with the promise of rain. From her bedroom window, the skyline looked like a chessboard made of glass and shadow. Ethan had already left. He'd kissed her cheek, soft and perfunctory, before vanishing into his day of meetings and lies. She watched the elevator doors close and listened until the sound faded into silence. Then she allowed herself to breathe. Not the shallow, careful rhythm she used to maintain composure, but a deep, primal inhale that filled her lungs with resolve. By sunset tomorrow, the world would no longer see a dutiful wife. They would see the woman behind the mask. Amara spent the day in quiet preparation, moving through each hour with ritualistic precision. The plan was already flawless, timed, rehearsed, and bulletproof, but execution required discipline. She knew better than anyone that even the most delicate surgery could fail if the hands trembled. She began by erasing Ethan from her physical space. Every photograph on the mantel came down, each smile that had once been evidence of devotion, now just evidence of illusion. Their wedding portrait, the one that had hung in the hallway for 7 years, she didn't destroy. She placed it face down in a drawer. Destruction was too merciful. Silence was worse. As the apartment emptied of memories, it began to breathe again. Lighter, freer. For the first time in months, she felt her own reflection looking back at her without disguise. In the afternoon, she met her stylist, a sharp-eyed woman named Danica, who understood transformation not as vanity, but as strategy. "What kind of impression do you want to make tomorrow?" Danica asked, studying Amara's face as though sketching her in her mind. "I want him to look at me," Amara said, her voice cool, "and realize he never actually saw me before." Danica smiled faintly. "Then we'll make you unforgettable." Hours blurred in a choreography of silk, cosmetics, and vision. The crimson gown clung like liquid fire, sculpted to perfection. Every pin in her updo, every flick of eyeliner, every stroke of red lipstick became a declaration. This wasn't about beauty. It was about power disguised as grace. "Your face," Danica murmured, adjusting the final strand of hair, "is calm, but your eyes, there's a storm in them." "Good," Amara replied. "I need both." When the stylist left, the penthouse was quiet again. The faint scent of perfume lingered, amber and smoke, chosen not for sweetness, but for command. Amara sat before her mirror, the soft hum of the city outside her window, merging with the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. The woman looking back at her was familiar yet unrecognizable. Her reflection didn't flinch, didn't tremble. The softness that had once been her armor was gone, replaced by something honed, deliberate, dangerous. She touched her jawline lightly. "The mask," she whispered, "isn't to hide who I am. It's to make sure he sees what he's done." Later that evening, she met Claire Whitmore in her office for one final briefing. The lawyer's tone was brisk, but her eyes betrayed curiosity. "You really intend to hand him the papers there, in front of everyone?" "Yes," Amara said simply. Claire sighed, tapping the folder between them. "You understand that when you do, it won't just destroy his career, it will redefine yours." "I'm counting on that," Amara said. Claire studied her for a long moment. "Do you know what I envy about you, doctor? You never raise your voice. You just build tension until the air does it for you." Amara smiled faintly. "In my line of work, panic kills. Precision saves." When she returned home that night, the city glowed like a heartbeat beneath the fog. She walked through her apartment slowly, touching the surfaces that had once defined their life together. The marble countertop where they'd toasted anniversaries, the couch where they'd shared laughter that now felt counterfeit. She wasn't nostalgic. She was performing an autopsy on the ghost of her marriage. Every betrayal left a trace. She could almost see them now, the invisible fingerprints of deceit smudged across the home they'd built. At midnight, unable to sleep, Amara opened the balcony doors and stepped into the cold. The city air bit at her skin, but she didn't retreat. The lights stretched endlessly, and for the first time, she realized how vast her world had become beyond Ethan's orbit. From inside, her phone buzzed, a text from Raul Mendoza. Tomorrow's guest list confirmed. Caldwell +1, Lena Moreau. He'd even attached a photograph from earlier that day. Ethan and Lena leaving an art gallery, her hand brushing his sleeve. The gesture was small but intimate, practiced. Amara stared at it for a long moment. Then she deleted it. She no longer needed proof. The truth was already etched into her bones. She went back inside, closed the doors, and stood before her mirror once more. She began to rehearse, not words but posture, the precise angle of her chin, the measured calm of her breath, the silence she would hold before speaking his name in front of everyone. The world would call it scandal. She would call it surgery. Every movement tomorrow would be deliberate, every syllable calculated. The confrontation would not be rage. It would be elegance weaponized. When she finally lay down to sleep, the crimson gown hung beside her bed like a living thing, its folds shimmering faintly in the low light. It looked less like fabric and more like prophecy. As her eyes closed, one thought carried her into dreams. Tomorrow, I will not wear armor. I will wear truth. Dawn came soft and golden, sliding over the skyline and spilling through the penthouse windows. Amara rose, rested and still. The scent of rain drifted through the open glass, mingling with the perfume that waited on her vanity. She looked at her reflection one last time before the day began. Her expression was serene, her eyes unyielding. The mask was ready, but this time it wasn't to conceal her pain. It was to reveal his. Rain pearls on the awning of the St. Regis, like 1,000 held breaths. Black cars slide to the curb, cameras flare. New York's most polished faces glide across the carpet as if the night itself were spun from silk. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers bloom with light. Strings rise, champagne hisses. The air smells faintly of jasmine and money. It is a night made for appearances. Ethan Caldwell arrives early, Lena Moreau on his arm, her dress a pale, studious gold. She laughs the carefully measured laugh of someone who has practiced elegance in mirrors. He nods to trustees, claps shoulders, shakes hands. When a photographer asks for one together, Ethan angles his body to the lens with the ease of a man who believes the world belongs to him. He looks for a moment, untouchable. Across town, an elevator doors open with a muted hush. Amara steps out like a verdict rendered. Crimson silk trails after her, the color of decision. Danica's final pin holds her hair in a sovereign sweep. The perfume at her throat is smoke and amber and certainty. Claire Whitmore meets her in the lobby with a leather portfolio clutched like a seal of fate. "You have the papers," Amara says. "I have the world you're owed," Claire answers, and something like pride flickers across her features. They ride to the ballroom level without speaking. As the doors part, discreet eyes lift, register, and linger. The head waiter recognizes Amara first, the hospital's youngest department chair, the woman last year's honorees toasted until the room glowed. He startles at the sight of her, unable to name why the air shifts when she enters. Some people wear beauty, some people carry consequence. The plan unspools. Raul Mendoza is already inside, another tuxedo in the perimeter. He texts, "At East Entrance, Caldwell near dais, cameras left, photogs primed." Amara's thumb hovers over the screen only long enough to type, "Understood." She takes in the field the way a surgeon reads an operating room. Light sources, angles, routes of access and retreat. The orchestra is mid-waltz. Donors congregate like constellations. A journalist from a national magazine stands near the floral arch where couples pose for proof of having been here. The stage is where she expected. The microphones gleam. In 12 minutes, Ethan will give his opening remarks on ethics, innovation, and the urgency of care. Ethics. A server offers her a flute. She accepts, not to drink, but for the choreography. Wrist low, elbow relaxed, the glass a gleaming metronome that keeps her calm. Claire drifts to a vantage point that reads as casual presence. Raul blends into shadow, phone poised. The world moves in slow frames. Every second stacks neatly atop the last, a tower built for gravity. Across the room, Ethan sees her. The recognition is a visible thing, a small detonation behind his eyes. His smile falters, then reforms with frantic elegance, like a man smoothing a rumpled napkin while the table burns. He squeezes Lena's hand without meaning to. Lena follows his gaze and goes statuesque, the human equivalent of a held breath. They are beautiful in their panic. Amara does not look away. It is not defiance, it is authorship. She crosses the room without hurry. Conversations falter as if someone has reached into the orchestra and closed a fist around the strings. A board member murmurs her name with a reverence usually saved for saints and executioners. Dr. Bennett, a trustee says, almost bowing. We didn't know. I am exactly where I'm meant to be, she replies, and the trustee, not knowing why, steps aside. Ethan meets her halfway, forced to. To retreat would be to confess. Up close, he smells of bergamot and nerves. The mask of charm sits weightless and useless on his face. Amara, he says softly, too softly for the room, but not for the microphones that ride on the air. You look awake, she offers. Yes. Lena straightens, fingers smoothing the fabric at her hip, hand hovering near the diamond at her throat. She is not cruel, merely complicit. She opens her mouth to speak and closes it again. The glassy dignity of someone who has misread the script she was promised. A bell chimes, the MC mounts the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. We begin our program in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. The city loves countdowns. Amara tilts her head, the smallest, kindest gesture she will give him tonight. Congratulations, she says, voice velvet over a blade. You've brought your work home with you. Let's talk privately, Ethan whispers, smiling for onlookers while his eyes plead in a language he never taught her. She studies him like a scan. You prefer rooms where doors can be locked. He laughs too brightly, nods to someone behind her who does not exist, tries to pivot the planet with posture alone. The orchestra releases a breath, candles gutter and steady. A photographer lifts a camera, drawn by the gravity between these three bodies, wife, husband, adornment. Raoul steps to the left, framing a tableau history will recognize. Claire arrives without arriving, portfolio in hand, presence disguised as happenstance. She watches Ethan the way a coastline watches waves, unmoved by their temporary brilliance. Amara's gaze slips past him, sweeping the room she once filled with uncomplicated pride. She sees nurses in rented dresses, interns with borrowed tuxedos, donors who learn to feel generous by signing checks. She sees the kids who will never know their names, but will outlive their diagnosis because 100 strangers believed in a better ending. She came here, once, for them. Tonight, she is here for them again. The MC smiles. To open our evening, please welcome the chair of our innovation board, Mr. Ethan Caldwell. Applause swells like a reflex. Ethan steps toward the stage because the script says he must. He hesitates, looks back. In that glance is the whole architecture of this marriage. A man expecting permission. A man who has never believed he might be refused. Amara lifts her flute slightly, not a toast but a signal. Her eyes are steady, merciful, absolute. He turns, mounts the steps, reaches the podium. The microphones kiss his vowels. His voice projects on training and terror. Good evening, he begins. When we speak about care, we speak about truth. The chandeliers hum. Claire's hand rests atop the leather portfolio. Raoul's thumb hovers above the shutter. Lena touches the diamond at her throat as if it could anchor her to a version of herself that makes sense. Amara advances one measured pace, just enough for the light to find her. The room tilts toward her as if pulled by tide. And at last, the night she designed begins to reveal itself. The chandeliers trembled as if they sensed what was coming. Light fractured across the crystal walls, scattering flecks of gold onto gowns and glassware, illuminating faces that smiled without knowing they were seconds away from witnessing a spectacle that would sear itself into rumor and history. Ethan stood at the podium, a polished symbol of success, his tie immaculate, his words smooth. His voice carried across the ballroom with practiced rhythm, each phrase a performance designed to seduce the crowd into belief. When we speak of innovation, he said, we speak of the courage to rebuild what's broken. He smiled, and in that smile, Amara saw the final act of his illusion. From her place near the center of the room, she moved. Every step was deliberate, silent, precise. Heads began to turn as she passed. The scarlet gown slicing through the sea of black tuxedos and champagne-colored silk. A whisper rippled behind her, soft at first, then louder. People weren't sure what they were witnessing, only that something extraordinary was unfolding. Ethan's voice faltered when he saw her. Sometimes, he continued, his tone tightening. The strength to... He didn't finish. Amara had stopped at the foot of the stage. Her gaze held him in place, a surgeon's steadiness in her eyes. "Please," she said softly, "continue." The microphone caught her voice, carrying it across the ballroom like a current. It wasn't loud, but it was commanding, the kind of tone that made silence feel heavy. Ethan swallowed. "Amara," he murmured, his voice barely audible now. "We can talk." She smiled. "Oh, we will. Right here." The crowd's murmurs thickened. Claire Whitmore emerged from the periphery, the portfolio of documents in her hand. Raul Mendoza raised his phone discreetly, the camera trained on the scene. Amara took the steps to the stage slowly, her gown catching the light like moving flame. When she reached him, she didn't look at Lena Moreau, standing near the bar, frozen in dawning comprehension. She looked only at Ethan, calm, radiant, merciless. "I'd like to thank my husband," she began, taking the microphone with effortless control, "for his words about rebuilding what's broken. Because tonight, we'll be doing exactly that." A nervous laugh flickered somewhere in the audience, then died. Ethan tried to smile, to regain footing. "Amara, this isn't..." She turned to the crowd. "My husband has been the face of ethics and innovation in this city. You all know his speeches, his generosity, his devotion." She paused, her tone softening with tragic grace. "I knew that devotion once too, until I realized it was being spent elsewhere." The room exhaled, collectively, in disbelief. 1,000 diamonds glittered like startled eyes. She opened the folder Claire handed her. Inside was the evidence: photographs, receipts, transfers. One by one, she lifted them for the audience to see. "Every Tuesday," she said evenly, "while he told me he was at board meetings, he was here, at dinners, art shows, and hotels, with a woman named Lena Moreau." The name landed like thunder. All heads turned toward the woman at the bar. Lena's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against marble. Ethan's face drained of color. "Amara, stop this." "Oh, I intend to." She held up the next document. "He used company funds to buy her jewelry, a penthouse, and perhaps my favorite detail, this necklace." Her gaze drifted toward Lena. $20,000 from the foundation account. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone raised a phone. Another followed. Cameras began recording. Ethan stepped forward, lowering his voice. "We can fix this privately." Amara's eyes gleamed. "Privately? You made our marriage public property long ago. You performed love in every photograph, every gala. It's only fitting that truth enjoys the same stage." The orchestra had stopped playing. Waiters froze mid-motion. The silence was electric, the kind that crackles right before a building catches fire. Claire withdrew the divorce papers and placed them on the podium. "Mr. Caldwell," she said coolly, "these are yours." Ethan stared at the folder as though it might explode. "This is insane." "No," Amara said quietly. "This is evidence." Raul's camera caught the exact moment Ethan's hands trembled, the papers unfolding like a confession. Gasps swept through the room again, followed by an applause so faint it was almost pity. "Sign them," Amara said. He looked at her, desperate, broken beneath the perfection of his tuxedo. "Amara, please. Don't do this here." She tilted her head. "Why not? You built your reputation on spectacle." Her voice softened, almost kind. "Let's finish it with one." Lena tried to slip toward the exit, but whispers trailed her. Names, judgments, curses. The social world she had fought to enter was closing its golden gates. Ethan finally took the pen. Every stroke of ink sounded like thunder to Amara's ears. When the last page was signed, she took the folder back and held it high. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm, almost ceremonial, "for making it official." A woman in the front row raised her glass, whispering, "To the truth." The toast caught like wildfire. Glasses lifted across the room, some in awe, some in disbelief. Ethan stood motionless, stripped of every illusion he'd ever worn. The lights seemed too bright now, revealing every fracture, every lie. Amara turned toward him, her eyes soft but unyielding. "You always said the secret to success was controlling the narrative. But you forgot. Truth doesn't need control. It only needs time. Then, without another word, she stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted for her, reverent, silent. Raoul followed her with the camera lowered, as though he were recording history rather than scandal. Claire trailed behind, the signed papers clutched like trophies of justice. At the bar, Amara paused beside Lena, whose hands trembled around the edge of a chair. Their eyes met, one filled with guilt, the other with mercy. "Keep the necklace," Amara said quietly. "You'll need something beautiful to remember the fire by." And with that, she walked toward the exit, her gown trailing like smoke in the aftermath of a blaze. Behind her, the ballroom buzzed with disbelief. Voices rising, phones flashing, the story already growing wings. By the time she reached the doors, Ethan's voice broke across the silence one last time. "Amara." She didn't turn. The chandelier above him flickered, casting him in fractured light. The golden mogul, the perfect husband, now a relic, collapsing under the weight of his own design. Amara stepped into the rain. It fell cold and clean against her skin, washing away the last trace of his touch. Inside, the ballroom burned, not with fire, but with truth. And sometimes, she thought, that was the hotter flame. The storm outside had turned the city to glass. Rain streaked the windows of the St. Regis, distorting the skyline into a trembling reflection of what had just unraveled inside. The ballroom, once a cathedral of elegance, was now a battlefield of whispers. Crystal glasses stood half full, tables abandoned mid-course, the scent of perfume and panic mingling in the air like smoke after an explosion. Ethan Caldwell remained at the center of it all, a man suddenly emptied of power. He still clutched the pen he'd used to sign the divorce papers, the ink drying into a confession no speech could repair. Around him, the city's most polished names were pretending not to stare, yet unable to look away. They were witnessing something both terrible and magnetic, the fall of a golden man in real time. Lena Moreau stood by the bar, pale beneath the ballroom's fractured light, the diamond necklace at her throat, the one bought with Amara's stolen trust, gleamed like evidence. No one approached her. No one would. Reputation was currency in this room, and hers had just been declared counterfeit. Claire Whitmore, composed as ever, closed the leather folder containing Ethan's signature and tucked it beneath her arm. She didn't smile. She simply met Amara's eyes from across the room and gave a subtle nod. The quiet acknowledgement between two women who understood that some wars are won not with noise, but with precision. Amara stood near the entrance now, calm amid the ruin. Her crimson gown, heavy with rain from the street, glowed darkly beneath the chandeliers. The crowd's murmurs swelled around her, but she seemed untouched, untouchable, like the still point around which chaos spun. Ethan finally moved. He stepped toward her, his expression cracked open, disbelief collapsing into desperation. "Amara," he said, voice rough, "please, don't walk away like this. Not after everything we built." She turned to face him fully, her tone soft yet slicing. "You built nothing. You borrowed. You performed. You took the foundation of my loyalty and used it to construct your theater." His breath hitched. "You don't understand." "Oh, I do." She took a step closer. "I understand better than you ever did. You thought power was something you could possess. But power," she said, her eyes gleaming, "is something you become." The crowd had grown silent again, drawn helplessly to the confrontation. The orchestra, uncertain, let the last of its music die. The only sound was the rain hammering the windows, a percussion fitting for the end of an empire. Ethan's shoulders slumped. "What do you want from me?" Amara's voice softened, not with forgiveness but with finality. "Nothing. You've already given me everything I need. Your signature." She turned slightly toward Claire, who opened the portfolio just enough for the papers to catch the light. "The assets, the accounts, the properties, they'll all transfer by morning. You'll have what you said you always wanted, Ethan. Freedom." He closed his eyes, shaking his head as if refusing the reality unraveling around him. "You've ruined me." Amara tilted her head. "No, you did that the moment you forgot what truth feels like." Lena, trembling, finally spoke from across the room. "Amara, I didn't know. He told me he was divorced, that you were just..." Amara's gaze found her, calm and steady. You don't have to explain. You were a symptom, not the disease. A few guests turned away, uncomfortable, ashamed of their fascination. But many couldn't look anywhere else. It wasn't scandal they were watching. It was metamorphosis. Ethan staggered toward the nearest chair and sank into it, head in his hands. The flash from a reporter's phone caught his profile, immortalizing defeat in a single frame. Within hours, the photograph would circulate through boardrooms, gossip columns, and private group chats. By morning, every investor, every partner, every would-be ally would know. The man they'd built monuments around was now ash. Amara didn't stay to watch the collapse. She stepped away from the scene she had orchestrated, her movements unhurried, her silence louder than the murmurs rising behind her. Raul Mendoza slipped through the crowd, capturing his final shots. The lawyer collecting signatures, the mistress shrinking beneath chandeliers, the titan undone. History, he knew, loved symmetry. At the doorway, Amara paused. She looked back just once. Ethan had lifted his head, eyes hollow, lips parted as though searching for a script he no longer knew. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said softly. "You taught me how to rebuild what's broken. I just never expected it would be myself." And then she left. Outside, the storm had eased to a steady drizzle. The doorman held an umbrella, but Amara waved it away. The rain felt clean, honest, necessary. She walked down the steps alone, the city's hum growing louder with each footfall. Somewhere behind her, she knew the ballroom was still buzzing, voices rising, theories spinning, phones flashing. But that noise belonged to the past. Her car waited at the curb, black and gleaming, but she didn't get in immediately. She stood under the rain, watching the reflection of the St. Regis shimmer on the wet pavement. The same building where Ethan had once promised her eternity now stood as a monument to her rebirth. Claire emerged moments later, her heels clicking against the stone. "It's done," she said simply. Amara turned to her, the rain catching in her lashes. "No, Claire, it's just begun." The lawyer studied her, then smiled faintly. "You're remarkable." Amara shook her head. "Just awake." They exchanged no further words. Claire slipped into her own car and vanished into traffic. Amara finally entered hers. The driver glanced at her through the mirror, uncertain whether to speak. She met his eyes briefly and said, "Home." As the car pulled away, she watched the city glide by in streaks of gold and rain. Her hand rested on her lap, steady, though her pulse thrummed with something new. Not fury, not grief, but release. She opened her clutch and took out the pen Ethan had used to sign his name. The ink stain at its tip caught the streetlight like a tiny ember. She rolled it between her fingers for a moment before dropping it into the trash compartment beside her seat. Some fires burn everything they touch. Others, she thought, clear the land for something better to grow. By the time she reached her building, the rain had stopped entirely. The streets gleamed clean and endless. She stepped out, her reflection following her in every puddle. A woman once broken, now molten, refined by her own flames. The ink was dry, the signatures complete. The ashes, at last, were hers to rise from. The Seine shimmered beneath a pale winter sun, its surface rippling like silk as the breeze carried the faint perfume of roasted chestnuts and rain-soaked stone. The bells of Saint-Germain-des-Prés tolled softly in the distance, each note marking not the passage of time, but the rebirth of a woman who had once mistaken endurance for love. It had been 6 months since the night of the gala, 6 months since the world watched Ethan Caldwell's empire collapse beneath the weight of his own deceit. 6 months since Amara Bennett had signed her own freedom into existence. Paris had not been her escape. It was her resurrection. Her townhouse overlooked Rue de l'Université, where sunlight slanted across wrought iron balconies, and the sound of morning espresso machines blended with laughter from cafes. Inside, the walls were lined with paintings, some hers, some found, each one carrying the same quiet ferocity she now felt every time she breathed. Gone was the sterile perfection of her old life, the marble, the symmetry, the curated silence. Paris breathed differently. Here, windows stayed open, wine glasses stayed half full, and time itself moved with human imperfection. Amara moved through it with grace, dressed simply, her hair unbound. The city had given her something she didn't know she'd lost, softness. Not weakness, but the kind of softness forged from surviving fire and learning not to flinch at the heat. Every morning she wrote, not medical reports or statements, but pieces of herself, essays, letters, fragments of reflection. It began as therapy and soon became testimony. The pages filled quickly, her handwriting fluid, elegant, alive. By spring, her writings formed a manuscript, a hybrid of memoir and manifesto titled The Anatomy of Resilience. The publishing house in Paris didn't hesitate. They'd read her story in Le Monde, where a journalist had written an essay that began, "When truth walked into the ballroom that night, she was wearing red." The image had gone viral across continents, inspiring women who saw in Amara not tragedy, but transformation. She didn't care for fame, but she understood its utility. Power, she had learned, could be redefined. In the evenings, she would walk along the river, the city glowing gold against the blue dusk. Sometimes she'd stop at the Pont Alexander III bridge, watching the lights flicker on the water below, the way reflections refused to stay still. One night a man stopped beside her, an elderly artist, sketchbook in hand. He had seen her there before and with a smile, asked if she would mind him drawing her. "Draw what you see," she said. When he turned the page toward her minutes later, the portrait was not of beauty, but of strength. The lines of her face were etched with quiet fire. Beneath it, he had written a single word in French, renaître, to be reborn. For the first time in years, Amara felt her eyes sting with tears that did not come from pain. Her foundation followed her across the ocean. With Claire's guidance and the wealth recovered from the divorce, she founded the Bennett Initiative, an organization supporting women navigating betrayal, financial abuse, and personal reinvention. Headquarters in Paris became a sanctuary. Legal advisors, counselors, financial mentors, all under one roof scented faintly of jasmine and ink. Each week, women from around the world gathered there. Bankers, teachers, mothers, artists. They arrived fractured, uncertain, trembling, and when they left, they carried a new language, the vocabulary of self-worth. Amara spoke at the first seminar herself. She stood before them in a linen dress, her voice low and even. "Survival," she said, "isn't enough. We are not meant to crawl from ruins. We are meant to rise and build cathedrals from what burned." The applause came quietly at first, then crescendoed into something like prayer. Later, a young woman approached her in tears. "How did you forgive him?" she asked. Amara smiled gently. "Forgiveness is optional. Freedom isn't." Letters began arriving from around the world. Handwritten notes, emails, messages from women she had never met. Some shared gratitude, others confession. One came from a woman in Sao Paulo who wrote, "Your story saved me from disappearing into mine." Amara read them at her window each evening, the city humming below her. She no longer needed validation. What she felt was purpose, a word she had once mistaken for ambition. Ethan's name surfaced occasionally in the news. His company dismantled, assets sold, reputation in tatters. The last she heard, he had left New York for Seattle, consulting on minor projects under another firm's name. When she read that, she felt nothing. Not joy, not pity, just distance. The kind that turns a wound into a scar you can trace without pain. One afternoon, as she walked through the Luxembourg Gardens, a journalist approached her for an interview. He asked, "Dr. Bennett, what is the secret to rebuilding after devastation?" She paused, looking up at the canopy of trees shifting in the wind. "You don't rebuild," she said softly. "You rediscover." The interview later appeared under the headline, "The Phoenix in Paris." The image of her, smiling slightly, hands clasped, sunlight crowning her hair, traveled across magazines and social media, her name now synonymous with resilience. But to Amara, the transformation wasn't spectacle. It was anatomy. Every piece of her life that had been torn apart had regrown differently, stronger, wiser, luminous with imperfection. That night, she hosted a small gathering at her townhouse. Candlelight flickered against bookshelves, laughter rose and fell like music. She watched the women who had joined her cause, lawyers, writers, survivors, laughing freely, their joy unguarded. Claire was there too, glass in hand. She leaned over and said, "You realize, don't you, that you've become what he always pretended to be, a symbol. Amara looked toward the open window, where the Paris night stretched endlessly, beautiful and indifferent. No, she said, not a symbol, just proof. When the guests had gone, she lingered by the balcony, the city whispering below. Somewhere in the distance, church bells marked midnight. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of rain and jasmine. 6 months ago, she'd left a ballroom in flames. Tonight, she stood in its light. The past had not destroyed her, it had sculpted her, and Paris, with all its fractured beauty, had given her what no man ever could. Not a new beginning, but a return to herself. She smiled, whispered into the wind, "I am whole." And for the first time, she truly was. Paris woke to the sound of rain on rooftops, that rhythmic, contemplative kind that makes a city feel like it's breathing. Inside her townhouse, Amara stood before a long mirror, fastening a gold pin shaped like a rising bird, the emblem of the Phoenix Network. What had begun as a support circle of 12 women had, in less than a year, grown into a movement. There were chapters now: New York, London, Lagos, Tokyo. Journalists called it the Sisterhood of Reclamation. To Amara, it was simply life returning to its right shape. It had started with an idea over tea. A woman named Soraya, a Tunisian entrepreneur who had lost her company to a manipulative partner, had said, "We don't need rescuing, we need resources." That sentence had sparked something electric in the room. Within weeks, Amara and her small team built a platform that combined legal support, mentorship, financial literacy, and emotional recovery. The first official meeting took place in a Paris cafe basement, laughter echoing between walls still scented with coffee and courage. By the end of the night, they had a name, a symbol, and a promise. No woman rises alone. The logo, a stylized phoenix mid-flight, soon appeared everywhere, on lapel pins, newsletters, podcasts, and social media banners. But it wasn't branding, it was belonging. By spring, the Phoenix Network had become a global ecosystem. Each chapter ran independently, led by women who had rebuilt from ashes of their own. Lawyers taught legal rights. Accountants helped restructure bank accounts once co-owned by abusers. Therapists held sessions for grief that didn't have graves. Amara spent her days in motion, between cities, conferences, and conversations that felt like confessions. Every place she went, she carried the same message. Transformation was not the luxury of the privileged. It was the birthright of the broken. In London, she stood before a packed auditorium of executives and survivors alike. Her tone was soft but unyielding. "Society romanticizes resilience," she said, "but resilience is not beauty born from pain. It's the decision to live unshattered, to take back what the world told you to surrender." The standing ovation lasted minutes, but what stayed with her wasn't the applause. It was the quiet after. The moment she looked down and saw two women in the front row holding hands, crying not from sadness, but recognition. Her story, the viral story, had become legend. The woman in red, the ballroom inferno. But now, it was no longer her story. It was everyone's. One evening, she received a message from a small town in India. A group of teachers had created their own chapter, naming it the Fireflies. They didn't have funds or offices, but they had resolve. Attached was a photo, women standing in a circle, holding candles. The caption read, "We rise because you burned first." Amara stared at the image for a long time. For the first time in years, she wept, not from pain, but from the sheer immensity of purpose. Her foundation's success drew attention from world leaders and global organizations. Invitations poured in, to panels, to UN summits, to elite think tanks. But Amara accepted sparingly. She wasn't interested in being anyone's token survivor. She wanted systems changed. She used her growing influence strategically. One by one, she secured partnerships, banks offering financial education for women rebuilding after divorce, law firms offering pro bono representation, universities adding trauma economics to their curricula. What had begun as a story of betrayal was becoming policy. And through it all, she refused to let fame corrode truth. "The Phoenix Network," she said in every interview, "doesn't exist because I was betrayed. It exists because we all are, by silence. Her townhouse became a temporary home for women passing through Paris. One night, she hosted a dinner with 12 guests, writers, doctors, artists, refugees. They laughed, shared stories, and by dessert, one woman stood up and said, "Amara, you've built more than a network. You've built an inheritance." The words landed deep. After they left, Amara walked out onto her balcony. Paris glowed below her, the city flickering like a living constellation. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel pride, not the brittle kind that craves validation, but the quiet, grounded pride of someone who has turned pain into architecture. Weeks later, she received a letter written on embossed stationery. From Harvard University. Subject: Honorary Doctorate in Humanitarian Leadership. She laughed softly when she read it. The irony was poetic. The same institution where she had once studied medicine, now recognizing her for healing on a different scale. At the ceremony months later, she stood before the audience of graduates and dignitaries. Her crimson stole fluttered as she spoke. When you lose everything you thought defined you, you meet the truth of who you are. Fire doesn't just destroy, it clarifies. What's left after burning is what was indestructible all along. The hall fell silent, the kind of silence that doesn't follow a speech, but a realization. By the end of that year, the Phoenix Network had impacted over 50,000 women across 6 continents. Survivors became mentors. Mentees became founders. A movement that began with betrayal had become a map for rebirth. But for Amara, the most powerful transformation remained internal. Late one night, she sat by the Seine again, her reflection fractured by the current. Her phone buzzed, a message from Soraya. "We just opened our Nairobi chapter. They asked if you'd name it." Amara smiled. Her reply was simple. "Call it Dawn." She placed her phone aside, letting the night wrap around her. Paris hummed softly, the city that had given her back her name, her voice, her purpose. She whispered to the river, as if to all who had risen before her, "We were never ashes. We were embers waiting for oxygen." And with that, the phoenix soared, no longer a story of survival, but a revolution written in women's hands. It was late autumn in Paris when the past found her again. The leaves along Boulevard Saint-Germain had turned the color of rusted gold, spinning through the air like sparks from a fire long extinguished. The city was drenched in that peculiar kind of light, soft, nostalgic, dangerous in its beauty. Amara Bennett stood by the window of her townhouse, hands wrapped around a porcelain cup of coffee gone cold. The city moved below her, vivid and alive, but her eyes were distant, fixed on something unseen. She had been here for nearly 2 years now, 2 years of building, speaking, rising, and yet that morning, something felt different. The air carried a tremor. On her desk lay an envelope, ivory, unmarked, sealed in wax. It had arrived without warning, hand-delivered by a courier who said only, "It's personal." She'd left it unopened for hours, its weight haunting the room like a heartbeat. Now, finally, she reached for it, her fingers steady but her pulse uncooperative. Inside was a letter, typed, formal, American stationery. "Dr. Bennett, I hope this message finds you well. We have a patient at St. Joseph's Medical Center in Seattle who has requested that we contact you personally. His condition is critical, and he expressed that there are things left unsaid between you. His name is Ethan Caldwell. Respectfully, Dr. Miriam Hayes, Cardiac Intensive Care Unit." The room tilted, just slightly. For a long moment, Amara simply stared at the words, as if reading someone else's story. Ethan Caldwell, the man whose betrayal had shattered her life and inadvertently forged her into something indestructible. The man who had been both architect and ruin. Now he was dying. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in the soft darkness of her room, the sound of rain whispering against the windows. Her mind, once disciplined as a scalpel, replayed fragments she had long buried. Ethan's laugh echoing in their kitchen, his voice murmuring apologies that meant nothing. The way his hand used to fit at the small of her back before it became a stranger's gesture. She thought she had exorcised those memories, but ghosts don't vanish. They wait for quiet. By dawn, The decision was made. The flight to Seattle was long and heavy with silence. When the plane descended through the clouds, the gray skyline felt unfamiliar, sterile compared to the living pulse of Paris. She hadn't returned to the United States since the divorce. Now, walking through the hospital corridors, it was as though she were stepping through an old photograph, faded, brittle, but still sharp in its edges. Dr. Hayes met her at the entrance of the ICU, her expression kind but professional. "He's been asking for you since yesterday," she said. "You don't have to stay long if you don't wish to." Amara nodded. "How much time does he have?" The doctor hesitated. "Days, maybe less." The words landed softly but deep. She followed her through the glass doors, where the hum of machines filled the air. And there he was, Ethan Caldwell. The once mighty man who had commanded rooms now lay diminished beneath hospital sheets, his skin sallow, his hair silvered. The oxygen mask obscured half his face, but she recognized him instantly, not as he had been, but as time had made him honest. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion. Then, recognition. "Amara." His voice cracked on the syllable, barely a whisper. She stood at the foot of the bed, posture composed, heart unsteady. "Hello, Ethan." He smiled faintly, a ghost of his old charm. "You came." "I did." "Why?" "Closure," she said simply. He laughed weakly. "I thought you'd say revenge. That was years ago." He nodded slowly, the sound of machines filling the silence between them. "I followed your work," he murmured. "The Phoenix Network. The Foundation. You turned the fire I gave you into light." Amara's gaze softened, but her voice remained even. "You didn't give me the fire, Ethan. You were the debris it burned." He coughed, a fragile sound, wet with pain. "I know, and I've deserved every headline, every whisper. But I didn't call you for forgiveness." "Then what?" His eyes filled with a sudden clarity, almost peace. "To tell you I finally understand. The power wasn't in what you lost. It was in how you refused to disappear." Amara felt something shift inside her, a loosening, not forgiveness but release. He reached for her hand, his grip trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, "not for what I did. For how long it took me to see the woman I ruined." She let him hold her hand for a moment, just long enough for the past to exhale. Then gently, she withdrew. "I stopped being your ruin a long time ago," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "I know." A long silence followed, not heavy but sacred. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm, and outside the window, the Seattle rain fell in sheets, relentless and cleansing. When she finally stood to leave, Ethan's voice followed her one last time. "Amara," he whispered, "thank you for showing me what redemption looks like." She turned to him, her expression unreadable, her tone soft as dusk. "Redemption isn't what you ask for, Ethan. It's what you live for." He closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked at peace. By the time she stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The city glistened beneath the morning light, washed clean. She walked slowly toward the street, her reflection rippling in the puddles. No longer the woman who had been betrayed, but the woman who had outgrown the need to be avenged. As she reached the curb, her phone buzzed. A message from Soraya in Nairobi. "Another 200 women signed up for the Phoenix Mentorship today. We're naming our new hall Bennett House." Amara smiled. She looked up at the thinning clouds, the faint glimmer of sunlight breaking through. Somewhere behind her, the machines would fall silent, and Ethan Caldwell would become what all ghosts eventually become: memory. But she was alive, and the living do not haunt. They rise. The airplane cut through dawn like a blade through silk. Outside the window, the horizon glowed gold, that fragile hour when night hasn't quite surrendered, but morning is already winning. Amara Bennett watched the light bloom across the sky, her reflection ghosted in the glass, a reminder that she too had learned to live between destruction and beginning. Ethan Caldwell had died 3 days earlier. His obituary was respectful, sanitized, forgettable. Words like visionary and risk-taker filling the spaces where truth used to hide. The world mourned him quietly, then moved on. And so did she. But in the quiet of that flight back to Paris, she felt no triumph, no bitterness, only release, the kind that comes when you finally realize the war you've been fighting has already been won. Not by conquest, but by becoming someone who no longer needs to fight. Paris welcomed her home in spring's full bloom. The air smelled of lilacs and rain, and the city moved with its usual rhythm, careless, eternal, alive. Her townhouse felt different now, lighter. There were no ghosts left, only echoes that no longer hurt. That evening, she hosted a gathering at the headquarters of the Phoenix Network. The glass atrium overlooked the city, the Eiffel Tower shimmering in the distance like a promise. The event wasn't about her, it never had been, but about what had grown from her ashes. Hundreds filled the space, women from every continent, leaders, survivors, dreamers. Screens displayed chapters from across the world: Nairobi, Sao Paulo, Manila, New York, each one buzzing with the same heartbeat, the same defiant light. When Amara stepped to the microphone, the applause rose like a wave and broke into reverent silence. She didn't speak right away. She let the hush breathe. The moment felt holy. "I used to believe survival was enough," she began, her voice steady, resonant, that getting through the pain meant winning. But survival is only the first act. The real victory begins when you decide that your story will not end in ruin, but in rebuilding. She paused, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, meeting faces that mirrored her own journey in 1,000 different ways. "I once stood in a ballroom where everything I believed in burned," she continued softly, "and I thought I was watching my life end. But fire doesn't just destroy, it refines. The version of you that walks out of the flames isn't a victim. She's the proof that some things were never meant to break." The audience was still, transfixed. "When the world betrays you," she said, her voice low but powerful, "don't rush to erase the scars. They are the map back to yourself. The scars are the proof that you survived long enough to begin again." Behind her, the screen displayed the network's new initiative, Project Emberlight, a global fund to build resource centers in developing regions. Each would offer shelter, education, and financial independence for women escaping abuse and systemic inequality. Amara turned back to the crowd. "You are looking at the future, not because I built it, but because we did. Every woman who refused to disappear became part of this. Every story that began in betrayal ends here, in power." The room erupted in applause. But when the noise subsided, Amara did something unexpected. She set aside the microphone and stepped forward, speaking directly, without amplification. "If you are hearing this," she said quietly, "and you're still standing in your fire, don't run, don't hide. The light you're searching for is already burning inside you. It's not about revenge, it's about rebirth. One day, you'll look back and realize the fire didn't consume you. It revealed you." The applause this time was thunder. Some women cried openly, others simply nodded, as if she had spoken the words they had never been able to say aloud. Later that night, the atrium emptied, leaving only the quiet hum of the city below. Amara stood by the window, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand. Claire Whitmore approached, her silver hair catching the glow of the tower lights. "You know," Claire said softly, "when I first met you, I thought you wanted revenge. I was wrong. You wanted resurrection." Amara smiled. "I think I just wanted peace. Everything else followed." Claire nodded, then slipped away, leaving her alone with the view. Outside, Paris shimmered under 1,000 tiny suns. For the first time, Amara understood what her journey had always been about. Not justice, not forgiveness, but transformation. The kind that ripples outward, one story igniting another until the world itself begins to glow. She thought of Ethan one last time, not as a wound, but as a lesson. Some people are the fire, others are the light that follows. And she was both. As midnight deepened, she stepped onto the balcony, feeling the wind rise from the Seine. The air was cool, the stars fierce against the dark. She raised her face toward the sky and whispered, "Let it burn, and let it bloom." Because in every end, there is an ember, and in every ember, the beginning of light. If you're hearing this story, let it remind you, you are not your losses. You are what you become after them. You are the strength that refuses to vanish, the truth that survives every lie, the fire that learns to illuminate instead of destroy. Wherever you are, standing in the ruins or rising from them, know this, Your story isn't over. It's only changing shape. Find your fire, feed it with courage, and when it finally burns clean, step into the light beyond it.